South Carolina, 1856. There is a kind of strength that not even iron chains can remove, and at Harrowfield Plantation in 1856, that strength had a name, Adeline. People called her the most beautiful woman in the slave quarters, but those who truly knew her understood that her beauty was only the surface. Behind her calm and steady eyes was something that deeply unsettled Master Jonas Harrow. Courage. A quiet ancestral courage, woven by generations who had survived the worst of human cruelty. And to crush that courage, he gave her the harshest tasks, forcing her to carry the weight of 2 men, clean the big house until sunrise, and work under the cold and watchful eyes of Overseer Elias Crow, a man who took pride in breaking every spirit he touched. But his methods never managed to break hers. What no one realized, what you're about to witness now, is that Adeline was not simply enduring. She was watching. Every movement, every weakness, every aging beam and cracked wall of the plantation was carefully studied. She noticed everything with the patience of someone waiting for the perfect time to act. And that time came on a night no one at Harrowfield would ever forget. Adeline was sent to the upper barn. It was nearly midnight. The wind slammed against the old wooden boards, but there was something unusual in the air. Something that would have made most people hesitate, but she did not hesitate. When Elias stepped in behind her to supervise, what happened next was so shocking that even now, few people dare to speak of it. Only those who were in the quarters that morning know what truly passed between the cabins. A whisper, a secret, an event that changed the rules for everyone. They say the sound echoed across the entire plantation. They say the overseer shouted for the master. They say Adeline stood motionless, watching, as if she already knew what would happen next. Before we go further into this powerful story, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and comment which city you are listening from. Let us grow our community together. Thank you. Now back to the story. To understand what truly happened that night, to understand how one enslaved woman shifted the balance and made a whole plantation shake, we must go back to where everything began. Back to the day Adeline first arrived at Harrowfield and learned that survival demanded more than strength. It demanded strategy. It required patience. It required knowing your enemy better than they knew themselves. And most importantly, it required never forgetting who you were beneath the chains. Adeline was born in 1832 on a small plantation in Virginia. Her mother was a house servant named Grace, beautiful and intelligent, secretly taught to read by a kind mistress who believed education was part of Christian duty. Grace passed that knowledge to her daughter in secret, late-night whispers of letters and words, stolen moments with books hidden beneath loose floorboards. Adeline's father was sold away before she could even remember his face. Her mother told her his name was Joseph, that he was strong and gentle, that he loved them both deeply. But Adeline had no memory of him, only the empty space where a father should have been. Her mother died when Adeline was 8 years old. Fever took her within 4 days. The mistress, who had once shown kindness, had died years earlier and was replaced by a younger woman who viewed enslaved people as nothing more than tools. When Grace died, there was no one left to protect Adeline, no one to shield her from the harsh truth of her life. She was sold to a tobacco farmer in North Carolina, a man named Silas Pettigrew, who worked his slaves 16 hours a day and fed them barely enough to stay alive. Adeline spent 3 years there, growing from a child into a young girl, learning that beauty could become a burden when you had no power to defend yourself. At 11 years old, she was sold again, this time to a cotton plantation in Georgia. The owner was an elderly man named Colonel Thaddeus Reed. He was slowly dying from a wasting illness. His son managed the plantation, and his son was cruel in ways the old man had never been. Adeline worked in the fields. Her hands bled from cotton balls. Her back ached from constant bending. She watched people die from exhaustion, from beatings, from hopelessness. She saw children sold away, She saw mothers separated from their families, watched hope drain from their eyes until they became empty shells, and she promised herself she would never become that. She would never allow them to steal her humanity. She would never forget that she was more than property. When she was 16, the colonel's son trapped her in the tobacco barn. He had been watching her for months, making comments, offering promises, and whispering threats. That night, he decided to act on his desires, that Adeline had learned by observing. She had listened to the older women. She understood that sometimes survival meant fighting back, even when the odds were against you. She grabbed a tobacco stake and swung it with all her strength. It struck him across the temple. He fell, bleeding and shouting curses. Adeline ran. She knew what would follow. She knew she would be beaten, or worse. She knew her life there was finished. But she did not regret it. Some things were worth the price. The colonel's son demanded she be hanged, made an example. But the old colonel stepped in, not out of kindness. But the old colonel stepped in, not out of kindness, but out of business sense. Adeline was valuable property, young, strong, and intelligent. Killing her would mean losing money. Instead, he sold her quickly and quietly to a slave trader passing through. And so, at 19, Adeline found herself chained in a coffle of 30 enslaved people marching south toward the auction blocks of Charleston. The journey lasted 2 weeks. They walked 20 miles each day, slept in open fields, and ate scraps of food. Several people died along the road, their bodies left behind. But Adeline survived. She always survived. In Charleston, she stood on the auction block for the first time. Men examined her like livestock, checked her teeth, felt her muscles, and made crude remarks about her appearance and how she could be used. Adeline stood silent and still, eyes fixed on the distance, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. She sold for $1,200, a high price. She was purchased by a well-dressed man with cold eyes, Jonas Harrow, owner of Harrowfield Plantation. He looked at her once, nodded to his agent, and walked away. Adeline was loaded into a wagon with 5 other newly purchased slaves and taken inland, away from Charleston, deep into rural South Carolina. Harrowfield Plantation was enormous, 3,000 acres of cotton and rice, worked by 87 enslaved people. The big house stood on a hill overlooking the fields, with white columns and wide porches, beautiful yet terrible, a symbol of wealth built on suffering. Behind it were the quarters, 2 rows of small wooden cabins, and beyond them the work buildings, barns, storage sheds, the cotton gin, smokehouses, and blacksmith shops. Everything needed to run a self-sustaining empire. Jonas Harrow was 45 years old, a widower. His wife had died in childbirth 3 years earlier, along with their infant son, leaving him bitter and distant. He ruled Harrowfield with absolute control, supported by his overseer, Elias Crow. Elias Crow was everything a plantation owner desired in an overseer, and everything an enslaved person feared. He was 38 years old, a poor white man from Georgia who had risen from field hand to overseer through cruelty and dependability. He stood 6 feet tall, lean and strong, with pale blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. A bullwhip hung coiled at his belt, and a pistol rested at his waist. He had overseen Harrowfield for 6 years. In that time, he had broken men twice his size, crushed every sign of resistance, and built an atmosphere of fear so strong that people whispered his name. The enslaved people at Harrowfield lived under a strict routine. They woke before dawn, worked until dark, and slept in crowded cabins with dirt floors and leaking roofs. They were fed cornmeal and salted pork, just enough to keep them alive. They received 1 set of clothes each year, worn until they fell apart. Medical care was almost non-existent. Unless someone was valuable enough to justify the cost of a doctor, families stayed together only as long as it suited business needs. Children were forced to work as soon as they were able. The elderly worked until death. It was a system created to take maximum labor while giving minimum humanity. Adeline was first assigned to field work, picking cotton during harvest season. She joined a group of 20 women who labored from sunrise to sunset, with a short break at midday. The work was exhausting. The sun showed no mercy, but Adeline discovered she was stronger than she had known. She could pick nearly 200 pounds of cotton a day, more than many of the men, and she did it without complaint, without showing weakness, because she understood something important. In this world, strength was a form of currency, and if you wanted to live, you had to prove your worth. But Crow noticed her for other reasons. He observed the way she moved through the fields, graceful despite the hard labor. He saw how others were drawn to her, seeking her quiet strength. He noticed how she held on to her dignity, even when covered in sweat and dust, and that dignity troubled him. He had spent years teaching people they were nothing, that they had no value beyond their work. Yet here was this woman who refused to accept that lesson, who carried herself as if she still mattered, as if she still had rights, as if she was fully human. For the first 6 months, Adeline kept her head lowered and her mind sharp. She studied the plantation's routines. She learned which overseers were openly cruel and which were simply indifferent. She learned which enslaved people could be trusted and which might inform in hopes of small favors. She learned that Mama Bess, an elderly woman who had been at Harrowfield for 40 years, was the quiet center of the quarters, the one many turned to for wisdom and comfort, leader of the quarters, the one people turned to for guidance, for healing plans, for quiet wisdom. Adeline grew close to Mama Bess, slowly and with care, bringing her cool water on burning afternoons, helping her lift heavy loads, sitting still and listening to her long stories. Mama Bess had survived by understanding the system, by learning how to move through its cruelty without being crushed, by teaching others how to bend without breaking. She saw something in Adeline right away. This girl was different. She was not only surviving, she was thinking ahead, measuring, waiting for the right moment. What are you waiting for the right moment? What are you waiting for? Child Mama Bess asked her one evening, as they sat outside the small cabin they shared with 4 others. I do not know yet, Adeline admitted softly, but I will know when I see it. Mama Bess nodded slowly. Just do not wait too long. Waiting can turn into a habit. It can become a cage of its own. Adeline held on to those words. In the months that followed, the plantation had a blacksmith named Samuel. He was 24 years old, born at Harrowfield. His mother had died giving birth to him, and his father had been sold away when Samuel was 10. He had been trained by the former blacksmith and had learned the craft well. He was valuable to Harrow because he could mend tools and machinery, shoe horses, and handle work that would otherwise require paying a white tradesman. That gave Samuel a small measure of independence, a narrow space of freedom inside the prison of slavery, and he used that narrow space to think, to plan, to imagine what might be possible. Samuel noticed Adeline in her 2nd month at Harrowfield. He noticed not only her beauty but her sharp mind, the way she watched everything, the way she never wasted movement or speech, the way she carried herself with calm dignity. He created small chances to speak with her, offering to fix a cracked hoe handle or straighten a bent nail, simple excuses to stand near her. At first, Adeline did not trust him. She had learned that attention from men often meant danger. But Samuel was not like the others. He spoke to her with respect, treated her as an equal, listened closely when she spoke, slowly and carefully. They became friends. Sometimes after dark they would sit outside Samuel's forge, where the fading coals gave off a soft red light and gentle warmth. They spoke in low voices about everything and about nothing, about the past and about futures that seemed impossible. Samuel told her he had tried to run away when he was 16. He had made it 40 miles north before dogs found him. Crow had whipped him so badly he nearly died. and he had spent 2 weeks unable to stand. After that, Samuel stopped trying to run. He decided that escape needed more than bravery. It required planning, resources, timing. It required knowledge of the world beyond the plantation. He had spent years collecting that knowledge piece by piece. Adeline told Samuel about her life before Harrowfield, about her mother who had taught her to read, about the plantations she had been sold through, about the colonel's son and the tobacco stake. Samuel listened with deep focus. "Your mother gave you a gift," he said quietly. "Literacy is power. It is knowledge. It is the ability to understand the laws they use to bind us." "Can you teach me?" Adeline asked. "I can read a little, but I want to read well. I want to understand everything." Samuel smiled faintly. "I can teach you some. The former blacksmith taught me. He was educated, bought his freedom, and before he died he passed his learning on. But we must be careful. If Crow learns we are studying, he will see it as rebellion." They began meeting 3 nights a week long after everyone else had fallen asleep. Samuel would bring scraps of newspaper, old almanacs, any paper with printed words. They would sit by the forge, and Adeline would practice reading in the dim glow of the coals. She improved quickly. Her mother's early lessons had given her a base to build on. Within 3 months she was reading smoothly. Within 6 months she was reading political speeches and legal papers. Samuel had gotten through a quiet network of enslaved people who worked in town. What she read changed her. She began to see that slavery was not only local, not just one cruel man on one plantation. It was a system, a legal structure, an economy built on human suffering. The more she understood it, the more she noticed its weak points. One night while reading a newspaper Samuel had brought, Adeline found a story about a planned slave revolt in Virginia. The revolt had been betrayed before it began. The leaders were hanged. But what caught her attention was not the failure. It was the planning, the coordination, the way enslaved people on different plantations had worked together toward a shared goal. "We could do that," she whispered. Samuel looked at her carefully. "Do what? Organize?" She shook her head. "Not a revolt. We do not have the numbers or the weapons. But something different, something that weakens the plantation from inside, makes it less profitable, creates disorder, and in that disorder creates chances." Samuel was silent for a long time. "You are talking about sabotage," he finally said. "Small acts that cannot be traced to one person." "Yes," Adeline replied. "A tool that breaks at the worst time, a gate left open. Information shared at the right moment. Alone these things mean nothing. Together over time they build. They make the plantation less steady, and if we are careful they will never know it is planned." Samuel nodded slowly. "It is dangerous if we are caught." "Living here is already dangerous," Adeline cut in. "Simply existing is dangerous. At least this way we push back. At least we do something." She was old but wise and had survived longer than anyone at Harrowfield by knowing how to move within the system. When they explained their idea, she listened without speaking. Then she said, "You are playing with fire. If Crow suspects, he will torture people until someone speaks, and someone always speaks under pain." "I know," Adeline answered. "That is why the circle stays small at first, just us. 3, and we move slowly. We wait for the right chances." Mama Bess studied her face. "You remind me of a woman I once knew. She would not accept her chains. She organized a work slowdown. People resisted without looking like they resisted. It worked for 2 years before she was discovered." "What happened to her, Adeline?" he asked quietly. "They sold her down the river," Mama Bess said. "Louisiana. No one heard from her again. But for 2 years she made them pay for every bit of labor they took. She made them see we were not animals. We were human beings who could think and plan and fight." The sabotage began in small ways. A plow blade that cracked and snapped during planting season. A barrel of seed corn that became wet and spoiled after a roof leak. No one could explain. A gate to the pig pen left unlatched, so the animals escaped and destroyed part of the garden. Each event alone meant little, Accidents were common on plantations, but over 6 months the events added up. Production fell, expenses rose. Jonas Harrow grew irritated. Elias Crow grew watchful. He began observing people more closely, questioning workers, using his whip more freely to scare confessions. Yet there was nothing to confess. No single person knew enough. Adalyn also started gathering knowledge about how the plantation operated. She learned that Harrow kept careful ledgers in his study, recording every cost, every sale, every purchase. She learned he was deep in debt, that he had borrowed large sums to expand and depended on strong cotton harvests to pay his loans. She learned he had connections with the local sheriff and certain state lawmakers, but those connections rested on money and influence. If Harrow lost his fortune, he would lose his protection. This knowledge became a quiet weapon she stored away for the proper time. Then Jonas Harrow made a choice that changed everything. He decided Adalyn was wasted in the fields. Her beauty and intelligence, he said, made her fit for housework where she could serve guests and reflect well on his estate. He ordered her moved to the big house and assigned her cleaning and serving duties. Crow protested. He said Adalyn was a problem, said she needed to be broken, not are. You ordered, but Harrow ignored him. I know what I am doing, Harrow said. I want her where I can see her, where she can be properly trained. Crow accepted the order, but his anger grew. He saw it as weakness and began thinking of ways to regain control and force Adalyn back into her place. Working in the big house gave Adalyn access she had never known. She saw how the plantation was managed, saw the ledgers and letters, overheard talks between Harrow and his business partners. She learned the plantation was in worse financial trouble than she had guessed. Harrow had made poor investments. The cotton market was uncertain. He was one bad season away from ruin. She also learned something else that would matter greatly. Harrow was lonely, cut off by his position and by grief. His wife's death had left him without companionship, without anyone to speak with. In Adalyn, he began to see not only a servant but a mind sharp enough to answer him, someone who could ease the silence of his empty house. He started calling her to his study at night, supposedly to pour drinks, but truly just to have someone there, someone to talk to. He would sip whiskey and speak at length, while Adalyn listened carefully, storing every word. Talk about his troubles, his debts, his anger toward Crow, his memories of his late wife. Adalyn would stand there quietly, her face calm and unreadable, but inside she was taking note of everything, every complaint, every weakness, every small detail that might one day be useful. Slowly and carefully, she started to answer him, not with strong opinions that would seem too bold, but with gentle questions, simple-sounding ones that encouraged him to speak more and reveal more of himself. One evening after several drinks, Harrow looked at her closely and said, "You're not like the others. You understand things. Someone trained you well." "My mother," Adalyn replied softly. She believed learning was important, even for people like us. "People like us," Harrow repeated slowly. "You mean slaves?" He seemed to be testing her, watching her face to see how she would answer. "I mean people whom others think are less than human," Adalyn said, looking directly into his eyes. "But who know better?" Harrow stared at her for a long moment, then laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, but a surprised one. "You're dangerous," he said, "the most dangerous kind of slave, the kind who thinks, who questions, who refuses to accept their place. But I respect that. I find it interesting." From that night on, their relationship shifted slightly. Harrow began to treat Adalyn in a different way, not as an equal. He would never go that far, but as something more than simple property. He gave her finer clothes and better meals. He moved her into a small room inside the big house, instead of making her return to the quarters every night. The other enslaved people saw the special treatment. Some felt jealousy. Some felt fear. Everyone understood that the master's attention could be dangerous. But Adalyn told them she was using the situation, collecting information, building trust that could one day be used against him. Most of them believed her because Adeline had never led them in the wrong direction before. Elias Crow, however, saw only what looked like a slave being rewarded without earning it through fear and obedience. It offended his sense of order. It disturbed his belief that enslaved people must remain broken and afraid. He began watching Adeline closely, almost obsessively, waiting for her to slip, waiting for a mistake. He wanted to expose her, to prove to Harrow that she was manipulating him, to restore what he believed was the proper balance, where overseers like Crow held real control and masters like Harrow simply carry the title. Months went by. Adeline's place in the household became stronger. She had access to nearly every room. She was trusted to handle letters, manage accounts, and greet visitors. She used this access carefully. When she could, she copied papers. She memorized private conversations. She built a clear picture of Harrow's business dealings and personal ties. She also kept meeting with Samuel and Mama Bess whenever possible. She shared what she learned. Together they continued small acts of quiet resistance that slowly reduced the plantation's success. Then Samuel received news through the hidden network of enslaved people who passed messages between plantations. There were white people in the North, abolitionists, who were working to end slavery. They provided money and help to those escaping. They hid runaways and guided them toward free states. The network was real. It existed. It was risky, but it offered a chance. We could reach them, Samuel told Adeline and Mama Bess one night. We could plan an escape, not just running without direction, but with support, with a goal, with people waiting for us. The danger was enormous. If caught, they would be tortured or killed. If they failed while running, dogs would hunt them down. But if they stayed, they would slowly die there anyway. Worn down by hard labor and hopelessness, at least escape offered a chance at freedom. They agreed to contact the network and send word north that people at Harrowfield needed help. Samuel knew a man on a nearby plantation who had connections and could carry messages. They would begin there and wait for a reply. 2 months later, word returned. A Quaker family in North Carolina, 3 days north, helped runaways. If people from Harrowfield reached them, they would be hidden, fed, and guided onward, eventually to Pennsylvania and freedom. The escape require careful planning. Large groups would attract attention. Small groups, spaced out over time, would be safer. Someone would need to go first to test the path and confirm it was possible. Adeline volunteered immediately. I will go, she said. I have the most freedom to move. I can gain at least a day before they realize I am gone. Once I reach the north, I can send word back and guide others. Samuel protested. It is too dangerous. If Crow catches you, he will kill you. He has been waiting for a reason. I know, Adeline replied, but someone must go first. And I have something you do not. She pulled out a small bundle of papers she had hidden in her room. These are copies of Harrow's letters and records, proof of illegal actions. Even though slavery is legal, there are laws about treatment and record keeping. Harrow has broken them. If I reach the north, these papers can help build a case against him and bring authorities down on Harrowfield. Mama Bess looked at the papers with wonder. Child, if Harrow discovers this, he will, because I will not fail. They chose a date, 3 weeks later during the harvest festival, when attention would be on celebration and many overseers would be drinking. Adeline would leave in the evening, travel at night, hide by day. She would carry nothing that showed she was escaping. She would depend on the network, on strangers' kindness, and on her own strength. Samuel forged a small knife from scrap metal. It was simple, but it might save her life. Mama Bess gave her a pouch of herbs for healing and protection, both physical and spiritual. They prayed together for courage and guidance. But 3 days before the escape, Jonas Harrow held a dinner for wealthy plantation owners from across the region. Men who controlled thousands of enslaved people and shaped the politics of the state. Adeline served quietly, listening. What she heard chilled her blood. They discussed secession. They spoke of possible war with the North. They talked about what would happen if abolition were forced upon them. And Jonas Harrow said words Adeline would never forget. If it comes to war, if they try to take our property, I will burn this entire plantation to the ground, with every slave locked inside before I allow them to steal what is mine. The men murmured agreement, raised glasses to Southern pride and property rights. Adeline stood still against the wall, her face calm, but inside she burned with anger. These powerful men would rather commit murder than admit the humanity of those they claimed to own. They would destroy everything rather than accept they were wrong. In that moment, her plans shifted. She would still run north, but if she were caught, she would ensure Jonas Harrow paid for his threat. She would see the plantation burn only with its guilty owners suffering the flames. The harvest festival night arrived. Enslaved people gathered in the largest barn. There was extra food, music from fiddles and drums, dancing and singing, brief joy during a break from labor. Harrow and his overseers watched proudly from the entrance, congratulating themselves for allowing such small freedoms. Adeline moved through the crowd, whispering soft goodbyes without saying they were goodbyes. She hugged Mama Bess, longer than usual. She held Samuel's hand tightly, telling him with her eyes that she would succeed, that she would send for him, that this was not the end, but the beginning. As the night went on and the overseers grew drunk, Adeline slipped quietly from the barn. She walked calmly toward the big house, as if on an errand. Once out of sight, she continued past it, past the quarters, toward the tree line, at the edge of the land. Her heart beat hard, but her steps remained steady. She had prepared for months, memorized the path, hidden small supplies along the way. She reached the trees and disappeared into darkness. Behind her, the festival sounds continued. No one noticed. They would not realize for hours. By then, she would be far ahead. Adeline walked through the night, following creeks and animal trails, avoiding roads, moving north by the stars. Samuel had taught her how to find direction using the North Star. Even when clouds covered parts of the sky, she walked 6 hours without rest, putting as much distance as possible between herself and Harrowfield. By dawn, she was 10 miles away, tired but filled with hope. She found a thick group of pine trees, crawled deep into their center, where she could not be seen, and slept for 4 hours. She woke suddenly to the sound of dogs, faint but clear in the distance. Bloodhounds howling on a track. Her track. They likely noticed she was missing when the festival finished, and she did not come back to her room. Crow would have quickly arranged a search group. He would have sent the dogs out with something that carried her smell, and now they were coming quicker than she had thought. She left her hiding spot and ran, moving deeper north, trying to reach the river Samuel had told her about. Water would cover her scent. Water would give her a chance to survive, but the dogs were getting nearer. She could hear them clearly now. She could hear men shouting orders. She ran harder, her lungs burning, her legs aching, branches ripping at her clothes and scratching her face. She broke through the treely, and saw it, the river wide and fast-moving. She did not pause, she jumped in. The current was stronger than she expected. It dragged her downstream. She struggled to keep her head above the water, trying to swim toward the opposite bank, but the current would not give in. She went under, came up gasping, then went under again. Her dress was heavy, pulling her down. She pulled at the buttons, managed to push it off, wearing only her shift now. She swam with all the strength she had left, reached the far bank and pulled herself out, falling onto the muddy shore. The dogs reached the near bank moments later. They ran back and forth, confused and whining. They had lost the scent. Crow and 3 other men came on horseback. Crow looked across the river at the empty far bank. "She is over there somewhere," he said. "Spread out. Find where she came out." But the river was a 1/4 mile wide at this point. There were many places she could have stepped out, and tracking through water was almost impossible. The search group split apart, started checking both banks, but they moved slowly, uncertain, and Adeline used that doubt to put more distance between them. She ran beside the river for several miles, then turned east into the hills. The land was rough there, rocky and steep, harder to follow. She climbed until her legs could not carry her anymore, found a cave, really just a rock overhang, and hid there. From where she sat, she could look back the way she had come, see the small shapes of men on horses, see the dogs running in circles, see Crow's anger even from far away. She watched until evening, until the search party finally gave up and rode back toward Harrowfield. Only then did she let herself believe she might truly escape. That night Adeline kept moving north, walking through the dark, falling and rising again, cutting her feet on sharp stones, tearing her hands on the thorns, but always moving forward. By dawn of the second day, she was almost 30 miles from Harrowfield, farther than any runaway before her had reached. She was in land she did not know, guided by instinct and the stars and desperate hope. She found wild berries and ate them, drank from small streams, tried not to think about her hunger, her exhaustion, how badly her body hurt. She focused only on the next mile, the next hour, the next step. On the third day she saw a farm in the distance, a small homestead, and something about it seemed different. The barn was painted. The fences were strong and neat. A windmill turned slowly in the wind. It looked successful, but not like a plantation house. It looked like honest work, earned, not taken. She watched the farm for an hour. She saw a white woman hanging clothes, children playing in the yard, a black man working in the garden, who was not enslaved. She could tell by the way he moved, by how he stopped to drink water when he wished, by how he spoke calmly to the white woman. This was a free black man, or at least a man not living under the whip. Adeline made her choice. She was starving and weak. She needed help. She could not go much farther without food and rest. She walked toward the farm openly, her hands visible, trying to appear harmless. The woman saw her first and called to the man. He stood straight and watched Adeline come closer. When she was near enough, she said, "Please, I need help. I am running from a plantation in South Carolina. I am trying to reach the north." The woman and man looked at each other. Then the man said, "You are 3 days from the Quaker family. You have come far farther than most." The woman added, "You look half dead, child. Come inside. We will feed you and let you rest." They brought her into their small home. The woman whose name was Margaret gave her bread and milk. The man whose name was Josiah stood guard by the window. "We cannot let you stay long," he said. "People here know we are abolitionists. They watch us. If they see a runaway here, they will burn us out." "I understand," Aline said. "I only need a few hours, just enough to sleep and eat." "You will need more than that," Margaret said. "You will need a guide. The path north is complex, easy to lose your way, and there are slave catchers between here and safety." Josiah nodded. "I will take you as far as the Quaker family. It is too risky for Margaret and the children, but I know the road. We leave tonight." Adeline slept for 6 hours, the deepest sleep she had known in years. When she woke, it was dark. Josiah had a horse ready. He packed food and water and carried a rifle on his saddle. Margaret gave Adeline a dress that fit well, shoes that were not torn, and a coat for the cold nights ahead. "You are very brave," Margaret said. "What you are doing, traveling alone, takes courage most people do not have." "I am not brave," Adeline said. "I am only tired of being owned." "That is what brave means," Josiah said. "Being tired of injustice and choosing to act." They rode through the night. Josiah knew paths away from main roads, knew which farms were safe and which would betray them. They stopped twice to rest the horse, to eat and drink. Josiah told her about his life. He was born free in Maryland. His parents had bought their freedom before he was born. He moved south to help guide people north through the hidden network. It was dangerous work, but it had to be done. Someone must do it, he said. Someone must risk everything to help others. That is how we win. Not through violence, but through small acts of courage again and again, until the system breaks. By morning they were in North Carolina. Still a day from the Quaker family, they stopped at a small Baptist church. The preacher was a colored man who welcomed them, fed them, let them rest in the basement. He shared news. Patrols had increased. Slave catchers were more aggressive. Several people had been caught trying to escape north. Harrow from South Carolina was offering $500 for a woman matching Adeline's description. Josiah looked at her. You must have shaken him deeply. $500 is a large sum. I took something from him, Adeline said. Something worth more than money. I took his pride. I showed him his power was only an illusion. That is what he cannot forgive. They left in the afternoon, rode until evening, and reached a modest farm with a simple wooden sign, Johnson Family, the Quakers. Josiah knocked. An older white man opened the door, gray beard, plain clothing. He looked at Adeline and nodded. Thee is welcome here, he said softly. Come inside and rest. Thee is safe now. Josiah held Adeline's hand. This is where I leave you, he said. The Johnsons will care for you and send you to the next station, and then to Pennsylvania. Good luck. Thank you, Adeline said. Thank you for risking your life for someone you do not know. We are all connected, Josiah replied. Your freedom is my freedom. Your chains are my chains. That is what they do not understand. That is why they will lose in the end. The Johnson family hid Adeline for a week. During that time, they heard shocking news. A huge fire had broken out at Harrowfield Plantation. It began in the big house late at night, spread to the barns and buildings, destroying nearly half the plantation. Jonas Harrow barely escaped alive. Several overseers died, including a man named Elias Crow, who had been sleeping in a barn. The fire was being investigated as possible arson, but no suspects were found. Harrow had many enemies, both enslaved and free. Adeline listened with mixed feelings. She had not set the fire and had been miles away, but she believed she'd gone. You who had. Samuel, carrying out their first plan, using her escape as cover to burn Harrowfield down. She hoped he survived, hoped he escaped in the chaos, but she had no way to know. All she could do was keep moving north, toward freedom, and hope that one day she would hear her friends were alive. The Johnsons sent her to another Quaker family farther north, who sent her to a Methodist preacher, who sent her to a free black community in Virginia. Each stop lasted only a few days. Each guide carried her farther from South Carolina, farther from slavery, closer to freedom. With every mile, the weight on her chest felt lighter. The fear slowly faded and was replaced by something new. Hope, true and living hope, that she might truly be free. 6 weeks after leaving Harrowfield, Adeline crossed into Pennsylvania, a free state. She was taken to Philadelphia to a boarding house run by the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. They gave her a room, food, clothing, safety, and for the first time in her life, Adeline was free, truly free. She stood in her small room, looked at herself in the mirror, saw a woman she hardly knew, thinner, stronger, scarred, but not broken, and she finally let herself cry, releasing years of anger and pain and sorrow, mourning everything she had lost, and everything she had lost and everything she had left behind, to mourn for her mother, for the father she had never met, for every enslaved person still trapped in chains. But she did not cry for long, because freedom brought duty, brought chances, brought the opportunity to fight back in ways she had never been able to before. She still carried the papers she had taken from Harrow, the proof of his crimes. She handed them over to the Abolition Society. They used them to build a case, to publish exposés, to name Harrowfield Plantation as an example of continuing cruelty, to place political pressure on local officials. It would not free anyone right away. The system was too corrupt for that, but it planted seeds, created cracks in the base. added to the growing tension that would one day burst into war. Adeline also started working with the Underground Railroad from the other side, helping new arrivals, teaching them how to read, helping them find jobs, giving them the tools they needed to build new lives. 3 months after she reached Philadelphia, Samuel appeared. He had escaped during the fire and had been moved north through the same network. When they saw each other again, it felt like finding family, like learning that not everything had been taken away. They shared their stories and filled in the missing parts. Samuel confirmed that he had started the fire, that he had waited until Crow was alone in the barn, until the other overseers were drunk and distracted. Then he made his move. "I burned it down," he said. "The big house, the barns, all of it. I made sure people got out first, warned everyone in the quarters but the overseers, Crow and his men. Them I locked inside. Let them burn. I am not sorry. I would do it again." Adeline held his hand. "I am not sorry either," she said. "They deserved worse." Samuel nodded. "Mama Best got out too. She is at the next station and should be here in a few weeks. About 15 of us escaped in total. The others escaped in total. The others escaped or were sent to different plantations. Harrow is ruined, though. His plantation is destroyed. His name is destroyed. Even his political friends have left him." "We won," Adeline said softly. "Not fully. Not yet. But we struck a hard blow. We showed them that enslaved people are not helpless, that we can fight back, that we will fight back." 5 years later, Adeline and Samuel were married. They had 2 children. They bought a small house. Adeline became a teacher at a colored school. Samuel worked as a blacksmith. They were building the life that had been stolen from them, living the freedom they had fought so hard to gain. But they never forgot where they came from. They never forgot the people still suffering in bondage. They kept working with the abolition movement and the Underground Railroad, helping others escape, sharing their stories, speaking the truth about the cruelty of slavery. When the Civil War began in 1861, Adeline was 29 years old. She volunteered with the Contraband Relief Association, helping formerly enslaved people who ran to Union lines, giving food, clothing, lessons, and support. She also worked as a scout and spy for Union forces, using her knowledge of Southern plantations, her ability to move in certain spaces. Her sharp mind and brave heart helped her gather information that won battles, freed communities, and helped end the war sooner. Samuel joined the United States Colored Troops, fought in several major battles, survived the war, and came home with honor. After the war ended and the 13th Amendment ended slavery, Adeline did something she had planned for years. She returned to South Carolina, not to Harrowfield. That plantation had been destroyed during the war, but to the county and the region. She came with federal officers, with documents, with witness statements. She came to make sure that Jonas Harrow answered for his crimes. But when she arrived, she learned that Harrow had died 2 years earlier, broken and poor, living in a small house in town. All his wealth and power were gone, destroyed by the fire Samuel had set, by the war, by the fall of the system he had built his life on. Some people told Adeline she should feel cheated, that Harrow had escaped justice on earth. But she did not feel cheated. She felt victorious, because Harrow had lived long enough to see everything he cared about fall apart. He had lived long enough to feel powerless. To understand what it was like to have your world taken away. That was justice enough for her. What mattered more was helping the people who had survived, the formerly enslaved men and women who now faced an uncertain freedom, who needed education, land, opportunity, and tools to create new lives. Adeline spent the next 30 years doing that work, building schools, organizing communities, fighting for civil rights and equal treatment under the law. She lived to be 71 years old and died in 1903 in Philadelphia, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them free, all of them educated, all of them carrying forward the legacy of strength and resistance she had shown. In her last days, she told them stories. She made sure they understood where they came from. She made sure they knew the price that had been paid for their freedom. She made sure they understood that freedom is not a gift. It is something you fight for, something you protect, something you pass down to the next generation. The night before she passed away, Adeline's oldest granddaughter asked her, "Grandmother, were you afraid that night you ran away? Were you terrified?" Adeline thought for a long time, then said, "I was afraid every single day of my life until I ran. Afraid of being beaten, afraid of being sold, afraid of what men like Crow might do to me, afraid that I would die without ever tasting freedom. But the night I ran, the moment I stepped into those trees and chose to risk everything, that was the first time I was not afraid, because I had finally taken control. I had finally made a choice that belonged to me. And once you make that choice, once you decide that freedom is worth dying for, fear loses its hold on you." She closed her eyes, smiled softly, and said, "They called me the most beautiful woman in the slave quarters. But beauty had nothing to do with it. What made me dangerous, what made me strong, was that I refused to believe their lies. I refused to accept that chains defined who I was. I refused to let them steal my humanity. And that refusal, that simple and stubborn refusal to accept slavery, that is what gave me strength. That is what allowed me to turn the tables. That is what allowed me to burn down the world they'd built and walk away free." Adeline died peacefully that night. Her final words were, "Tell them. Tell everyone. Tell everyone. Tell them that no chain is unbreakable, no system lasts forever, no oppressor is unbeatable. Tell them that courage is not the absence of fear. It is acting even when you are afraid. Tell them that one person armed with truth and determination and the refusal to accept injustice can change everything. Tell them my story. Tell them I was here. Tell them I was here. Tell them I fought back. Tell them I won." And her family did tell. They shared her story for generations, passing it down, keeping it alive, making sure Adeline's courage and sacrifice and victory were never forgotten, making sure that everyone who heard it understood that resistance is always possible, that freedom is always worth fighting for, that the human spirit cannot be chained no matter how heavy the iron. And that is the real power of Adeline's story. Not only that she escaped, not only that she survived, but that she proved something deep about human dignity, about the unstoppable force of people who refuse to be broken, about the certain triumph of those who fight for justice, no matter the cost. They called her the most beautiful woman in the slave quarters. But history remembers her as something much greater, a warrior, a survivor, a woman who looked at an impossible situation and found a way to change it, who burned down the plantation that tried to claim her, who walked away free and spent the rest of her life making sure others, old, do the same. That is the legacy of Adeline. Not beauty, not obedience, not silent endurance, but resistance, bravery, and the unbreakable will to live free.